To you.
Hi, thank you so much, Ashley. I really appreciate it. And Tammy, thank you again for asking me to be here. Um, so I want to start with, we're still in COVID and understanding that at this point, we're probably all experiencing a quarantine fatigue. And so today, what we're going to be talking about is this quarantine fatigue. We're going to be talking about how do we still feel safe and setting boundaries, and also talking about the stigma around COVID diagnosis. And then we can talk about the holidays, and if people have specific questions, we do encourage to ask questions. And as Ashley said, we'll take breaks and ask some questions and have some dialogues and be able to hopefully address some of the specific things that you guys might be bringing and thinking about today. So definitely want to acknowledge with the quarantine fatigue that we've been doing this since March. And we thought we all did such a great job, and we felt that relaxation and things started to feel a little bit normal again. And then school, the anxiety, I don't know who might have children in schools or in daycares and college. I think all the anxiety leading up in end of July and August started to pick up again. And then we're in this position of now schools are in session, and oh wait, now here's this second wave that we've been promised this whole time. So by the way, you're supposed to still stay away from people, and you're still supposed to not have social and maybe not even trick or treat for Halloween, as right, Ashley said, that we've got these holidays that are looming. And so understandably, we're all really tired. My birthday was yesterday, and I made the decision. I drove through Temple, I went to Waco, and met two of my best friends from Dallas, and I made the decision to hug them. And they're the first two people I've hugged that have not been in my primary family since March. And we kind of did this awkward sign. Everyone looked away. We both had our masks on, and but making that choice of that space that said, there's something that I need, and being in quarantine sometimes is a little too hard. So what we need to figure out still is that what do I feel safe with, and starting to weigh that balance of what am I comfortable with, what should I be doing, and then balancing that with mental health. That I'm sure everyone has seen that there are increased drug and alcohol uses, that there's increased suicide deaths, and it's really lonely. And as much as we might be out there having sports or have picked up a rhythm with our jobs and with our work, that it still really gets to be a long time that says, well, I haven't seen my family in 6 months. I haven't seen my parents, and haven't hugged anyone. And especially if people are living by themselves, or if they're, like I said, if the children are at school or even at college, it just really can be hard not to still maintain that quarantined mentality. So what do we need to do? Because some people are more relaxed. Some people do say, well, why don't we just come inside? It's raining. It's freezing cold today, and I know that's been a lot of the concern with more of the states, more northern states, of as it gets colder, people cannot physically stay outside. And so how do we still continue to feel safe, and how do we set boundaries? And again, I want to acknowledge that there's that not knowing what risks are safe. At the very beginning, they talked about airlines and airports and how scary it was. And now it's starting to come out and say, actually, it's not that bad flying because of how constantly they're recycling the air. But it's the airports that are bad, and so kind of having this balance about not knowing what risks are safe and having anxiety around doing what's right and wrong. And then how do I really know what's right and wrong, and what might be right for me may feel wrong to you. I made a comment yesterday to my friends saying we went and got some coffee and it was pouring rain and we decided to sit inside, have coffee. And I was like having to really pay attention to my breathing. I was very aware of who's there and having masks. And I said, this is the first time that I've been inside someplace and eaten. And she was like very surprised by that. So clearly we were at different places of our comfort level, even though we were doing the same activity at that point. So we all get the same information. Some people choose not to listen to any of the information that the news consumption, that being on watching any type of media is around the coronavirus is too anxiety provoking just at that. So they choose to stop consuming the news. And then there's others of us on the other side of that that are still kind of on that 24-hour news cycle. I think especially as schools go back and had gone back into session as we're anticipating holidays and travels. So we can't assume how everyone or anyone thinks. We have to have conversations and we have to have dialogues about what someone's comfortable with. And I think that we wouldn't be doing something if we didn't think it was a risk. So just the simple fact of, like I said, I went and met people from Dallas. That's a risk. We went out to Magnolia. We went and got coffee indoors. That was a risk. And it was a risk that I was willing to take, but it's still understanding that it's a risk. If I have driveway drinks with friends and we're not wearing masks, but we're at a distance, there's still a risk. And so understanding that certain people's risk levels will feel different than mine, and then not to feel shame or anxiety when mine is different than yours. And I think oftentimes we can get that feedback of saying, oh, you haven't been in a restaurant? How could you not be going out and doing things? And I can feel shame like I'm doing something wrong about that. Um, and then also not judging this way, saying, well, oh my gosh, how are you going out? And when are you going to get sick? Right? Like there's kind of that karma aspect that it feels like I'm doing something better because I'm quarantining. And so that kind of going back to that quarantine fatigue, that it all just continues to revolve about what we feel. And I also want to acknowledge, so in that space again, that I wouldn't be doing something if I didn't think it was a risk, or even if I thought it were a risk that I was willing to take. But I oftentimes, again, I'm not going to do something if I think of it as a risk, right? And so if I'm doing something, but I don't think of it as a risk, but you do, I am not necessarily likely to disclose to you, oh, hey, but this is what I've been doing. And so when I think we're all like minded and we're all staying safe and not being in people's houses and not whatever it might be for you that feels COVID safe, that understanding that it is important to continue talking about what activities we're doing and how we're engaging with other people, other families, going to school. I know when my kids started school, there was kind of this tension of the families that were going to stay virtual versus the families that were going to be in person, and concern both ways of, well, the virtual won't want to hang out with the in person, and because they're taking a bigger risk. And so recognizing that we all take on risk, and just taking into consideration, how do we continue that dialogue around disclosing. And within that, what I just would kind of like to throw out there, because I'm not a public health expert, is to refer to those CDC guidelines. And I know that, and I think this very much contributes to the quarantine fatigue, is the polarization of wearing a mask and it becoming so politicized around, if I wear a mask, that means I'm a Democrat. If I don't wear a mask, that means I'm a Republican. And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I have heard of people kind of having, assault-like behavior of when someone's not wearing a mask, or when someone is wearing a mask. And that it is just so, that's going to add to the anxiety, and that's going to add to the angst of this, and reinforcing that we're not always in this together. And I definitely, again, think that's going to contribute to this heightened quarantine fatigue. And I'll just take a moment right here. I saw some nods with just as a few that I see the videos for, but I just wanted to check in and see, has anyone had that experience around the mask wearing or not mask wearing, or around the anxiety about what risks is okay for me to take on and how that may be different than my friend or my family.
I'll go ahead and mention, I know, publicly, at least where I am, people wear masks, and especially in grocery stores and places that I subject myself to. Um, so that makes me feel safe. What I've found, interestingly enough, that makes me feel unsafe are those tighter knit interactions, for instance, with, your family or in-laws or distant family, that you're all of a sudden kind of grasping with the fact that, wow, I'm going to be in a room with this person for multiple hours in a tight setting, and they just flew to Mexico and came back. I mean, that sort of jarring understanding of their comfort level with the risk versus mine, and me
Mhm.
having little ones, and then there's the stigma around, oh, little ones don't get the virus, and then some people say that they do, and the in-laws that you're sitting with think that little kids are safe, but you're the mom, so there's all sorts of um interesting dynamics, but I've found that it's been really only come up within those closer knit dynamics.
Yeah, I definitely think that there is something to be said about we're family, right? This is who I grew up with. This is my mom, my dad, my brothers, my sisters, my step parents, whomever, right? But I'm an adult and I don't live with them anymore. And so now if I go see them, and that goes back to that disclosure point, that I am bringing my bubble into their bubble, and then, right? And then it's their bubble of all the people that they've seen, and with all the people that I see that they've seen. And so that this one where I feel like I might be being safe, that it really is kind of, I think, a little bit overwhelming when we start to really recognize the potential exposures that we have, just and simply, oh, if I went to the store or my kids go to school, and not always recognizing the different exposures that everyone is going to have those. And so it definitely can heighten that. And it doesn't feel good because we want to see our family, and we want to, grandparents want to see their grandkids. And I mean, you said little too, Ashley, and just recognizing how precious this time is. And that I think that sometimes can put more of potentially on you as the parent, as the mom, to maybe relax just a little bit. And it's not the kids that you have to worry about, it's us, the grandparents. And you're the one, we should be protected, and if we're okay with it, then you should be okay with it. And I definitely think that, so I talked about feeling anxiety and shame earlier, and then now I might even feel some guilt. And that I just always, in my practice, I'll always say guilt is this. So my beliefs and my behaviors don't align. And so if I love my family and I want to have my children raised with their grandparents in a family oriented space, and I am staying home, I don't want these people in my house, I don't want them in my yard because they travel to Mexico, then my behavior is not going to align with that. And so sometimes just recognizing that this is where I want to be, and it's so important to me, and it's a value, and when I can, we will. And right now I just don't feel comfortable with that. And even acknowledging, and I feel horribly guilty, but there are certain things we can't control, obviously, with this virus, and recognizing that as such, we have to take care of our space. Because, like I said yesterday, when I went into that coffee shop, I really had to stop and take that breath, because, especially at that point when you're wearing a mask too, it starts to feel very confining. And so, recognizing that if I say yes to something that I'm not comfortable with, I'm not going to be in my best space. And so it's not going to be enjoyable. And then it's, why did I get myself tucked into something? Or why did I push myself beyond my comfort zone? Because it's not going to feel good. So the next, uh, um, so in this space where while we all have the same information, how we interpret it, how we implement it might be different. To say that maybe our common ground might be one of respect and communication, and that I may not, kind of going back to communicating, um, maybe validating, hey, I know that you guys really want to come see the grandkids, or I know that you really want to see me and I want to see you. And I'm not comfortable with that. And I respect that this is where you are and this is decisions that you might make. And I hope you can respect this is where I am. And so maybe that can be the common ground that we can foster in such a time, through our communication. Um, because I don't think it's very helpful to be defensive right now. And yet, when we are told we're doing something wrong, oh, you're meeting with people and not wearing masks, we're going to feel defensive about that, right? And in the same way, right, of you're meeting with your friends and you're wearing masks, right, that I'm going to feel defensive of that. And so really being able to recognize that there is such a stigma that is going into COVID. And so one of the, as we were talking about this and preparing, I was sharing that a couple weeks ago, my uh, three children had the couple days off for Columbus Day, and we went and saw my older brother, and we went to a national, or to a state park, and we drove the hour with him in the car. We had our masks on, all five of us. We had the windows down. And when we got out of the car, we took our masks off, and I was ready to leave my mask on. And my brother had said, I'm okay with it. We're outside. This is fine. And then a couple days later, he had a sore throat. And so he went and got COVID tested, and he was negative. And I think it's so challenging because I'm going, well, of course you're going to be negative. We don't have COVID. And I realize I can't say we don't have COVID because there are people, and especially children, right, that are asymptomatic. And so I think that it's such a, it goes back to that defensive state of he needed to do what was comfortable for him and responsible for him and going to get that test. Um, and then also recognizing that that was something that I felt a little tender about because it felt like I'd done something wrong. And that idea that I could be the one that would give it to someone else is awful, and it's very shaming, and it's I think it really impacts someone's likeliness to share the potential exposure. And I think we've seen a lot of this, for instance, on the news with the White House, that there's not been a transparency, that certain things have come out only because they've been discovered. And recognizing, well, we still wanted to look strong, and we don't want to look weak, and we don't want to look like we're doing something wrong, and recognizing that that's going to impact my desire to be transparent with you. And so having that awareness too, then, okay, well, if my brother did test positive, well, then I've got to go tell the school. So now my kids are going to be out of school for 2 weeks because they are exposed to or in proximity towards, right, someone that has been clinically tested positive. I have to tell my kids' sports teams, swimming. I have to tell the girls that I went to book club with, even though we sat outside and we were at a distance. And so the number of people that I start to have to tell really starts to add up. And then I start to feel, oh my gosh, I thought my friends make fun of me for being so COVID safe, right? I'm the girl that hasn't been indoors to eat anywhere. So then it starts to be kind of this, and going back to that space, it starts to talk about shame and anxiety and guilt and defensiveness around the behaviors we're having. And it just doesn't feel good. So it makes sense then that people aren't going to want to share, I'm waiting for a COVID test. It would make sense that people aren't going to share, right? If a family member had gotten tested, or if, and even with some of our schools where the kids are being sent home from exposures, that there have been some parents that have been very protective about their kids because you can't say because of HIPAA who's being sent home or not, right? Or who's been exposed. And so people are being very private about that. And I think that is such, again, going to heighten the anxiety. It's going to heighten the guilt and the shame that we feel and the defensiveness that we feel because it's that equation of if you have had kids or do have kids that are in elementary school of lice or the historic of being a leper and that just people don't want to be around you and they have this look and it's of when you have lice it's that you're dirty, right? And even though we all know that it's really that lice goes on clean hair, but there is something that's wrong with you that you got lice, right? And so the fact that you got COVID, what did you do wrong? And that's not something I want to out myself on. That doesn't feel good. And yet, this is such a highly transmittable disease. We have to be that transparent and we have to. And so, again, then we have all of these emotional reactions to something that's, if you will, science based. But that would say why I don't do, and I may not be as transparent. And I think that it doesn't feel good. So just being mindful around that there is a stigma with this diagnosis and also to say that when I was saying about here's this negative test, well, my brother a couple days later, being responsible, went and tested again. Well, maybe because I'm experiencing symptoms, ends up it's just allergies, but to have this space that says I cannot trust a negative test. I have a friend that works in a rehabilitation part of a hospital. And so she gets the people that are COVID positive, and after they've been on ventilators, she is a pathologist that helps and works with them on swallowing and recovery. And when she gets exposed to someone that's been positive, there's so much fear that gets connected to this, but she still goes and does her job. There's so much fear and anxiety and then she takes a test and it was negative, but she didn't feel any better because she knew this was someone positive that had she been exposed to. And so recognizing, so then she went back a couple days later and she got another negative test. And I think then we can start to lend some relief to that. And we can start to have a little bit more confidence in that. But on the other hand, and on the other side, I've heard so many stories, and I think I've seen in the news, like Alyssa Milano's one, but where you have this, I don't feel good, something's wrong. It's not just X, I'm not just having a cold, and then people don't get the positive. And so there's something that is just not satisfying that matches where I am. So there, again, when we don't have that confidence around the testing or the confidence around either yes I'm being positive and that validating how I'm feeling, or no I'm not, and really being able to assuage that fear that I have because no one goes and gets a COVID test without some anxiety. And to that point, like I was talking about my friend that works outside in the hospitals, that I do, and going back to the risks that we take on, I do want to acknowledge that people that have been working outside of the home this entire time, whether it's been an essential worker, whether it's been someone that has been allowed or required to return to their offices or to return to a work site, I think that it becomes, the more we do something, the easier it becomes. And so recognizing that, again, if I've been home this entire time and I'm home or homeschooling my kids or virtual school my kid, and our friends are, their kids are in person and the parents are both at the office, what they might be comfortable with will probably look and feel a lot different than what I'm going to be comfortable with because they're already in it and they've had to face that fear. And so they may still have fear, they may still have anxiety, but it's going to be in a lot lower level than me who's not doing anything because they're doing it for their survival, they're doing it for their job. And so recognizing that sometimes that also will contribute. If I have to be out, if you're making me be out, then I might be more comfortable taking that risk and may not think it's as big a deal. And look, I've been out since March. and I haven't gotten sick. So it may not be as big of a deal than the person that really doesn't ever leave their home. Um, Ashley, I want to just pause for a second right here and check in with, I saw a couple of chats come up. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, and Shannon, if you want to ask the question, or I can ask it for you, it's up to you.
My biggest fear is that, and I think it's my husband and mother-in-law, but they kind of poo-poo my fear. And my biggest fear is dropping a loved one off at the hospital and never seeing them again. Because that's the horror story you always hear.
Mhm.
And it's my biggest fear. I'm upset about it. And they don't share that fear. They don't, I guess they don't have the same anxiety that I have over it. And it obviously upsets me. But how would you suggest dealing with the anxiety? Look at this.
Yeah.
No, thank you, Shannon. Yeah, really appreciate the question. Dr. Crowley, what would you say? Thank you so much for sharing, Shannon. I encourage others as well. We all have a lot on that weighs heavy on our hearts right now.
Thank you so much for sharing, Shannon. And I'm so glad you said that instead of having us read it, because it is so emotional to say it. And sometimes it can be hard to say it out loud.
It was a lot harder to say out loud than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. And acknowledging too that when I have such fear, and I'm hearing you say it's not really fear for my health, it's fear for what happens if I don't get to be with someone, my loved one, and what they have to go through by themselves. That it's unthinkable. I can't even put myself, and it's the anxiety that this creates, it's almost paralyzing. And yeah, and so what I'm curious about is, so when this anxiety and fear comes up for you, and your husband and your mother-in-law aren't in the same stage of fear, what happens?
My husband just tries to talk me down. Don't worry about it. It's not going to happen. I won't let it happen. Don't worry about it. And that, of course, just flares it up even more, because telling me not to worry about something is going to do the exact opposite.
Of course. So do you guys then defer to your level of comfort, or do you defer to your husband and mother-in-law's level of comfort?
It usually ends up in an argument where I'm the one upset and I'm the one storming off and being the ugly one in the group because they don't have the same anxiety and fear. My husband doesn't get sick. If he gets sick, it's like once a decade. So he doesn't have the same reaction as I do. I'm a diabetic. So, and my mother-in-law is not, I don't know, she doesn't get sick that much either. So she doesn't have the same fear. I don't know. It's hard to read her sometimes, but her actions don't show some of the fear that I have.
Yes. Yes. And I think it definitely this entire time has totally changed the playing field if we have pre-existing conditions.
Yes, very much so.
Absolutely. And it doesn't feel good to have what we're experiencing be dismissed. And it really, I think, one of the strains that we as couples and as families experience, and that definitely contributes to the quarantine fatigue, is when we don't have this way of really, if we're not on that same page, in that it can cause this feeling of being alone in this. If I am not feeling validated in my space, then I'm going to feel really alone, and then just afraid. I'm going to feel alone and just really anxious. And so while this is not therapy, what I would just offer is to say, maybe try with your husband to say, could you just acknowledge that this is very scary for me? I have a lot of fear for this. It doesn't have to be right. It doesn't have to be wrong. And just have that be, this is where we start, and we can make whatever decision as a family from here next. But if we're not going to feel seen, then we're going to back off, right? We're more likely to step back versus if I feel like I say to my family or I say to my friends, this gives me anxiety, that my fear level is going up, I don't feel comfortable right here. When I feel respected with that communication, I'm more likely to stay in the playing field with them because I know, okay, they know where I am, right? It's like that game of Battleship, right? Okay, so you've just exploded something on me. You know where I am, and I need you to honor that space so that I can stay in the playing field. Yeah, and I think that oftentimes there can be with families, when you mentioned like my husband and my mother-in-law, that sometimes we can have more like-mindedness. Having alignment with one parent can feel like, so that'd be the grandparent, right? But like one parent can feel fine and be, well, I'm the age that is supposed to be protected, and so if I'm going to go live my life, and if I'm going to get sick, then I'll have gotten sick living. And then there's the other side of the population that says, I don't feel comfortable with this, I'm going to be more protective of myself. And but then who am I going to let in my circle? And sometimes that's going to be someone was sharing about like, well, I'm going to see my mom, but I don't want to see your mom, right? Because it's my mom, and I know my mom is my mom, and there's that level of trust, there's that level of respect within there. But I don't want to see your mom because she and I don't align. Now, sometimes people might take it a little too far of saying, this is a chance not to see your mom, whoever the mother-in-law might be. But absolutely to recognize that even if we feel safe, it can be a very false sense of security, of feeling safe. And I think when we don't feel safe, we're going to be more hypervigilant and in that paralysis space that I was acknowledging, that it just can be, it's hard for me to leave this space if I'm not like-minded with anyone. If no one else is taking this seriously, it's going to be really hard to abandon my post because someone's got to be vigilant. Someone's got to be paying attention. Thank you so much for sharing.
So Dr. Crowley, what I'm hearing, and please tell me if I am correct on this, is that you need to speak out to your family members and let them know your level of comfort. For me personally, my children poo-poo me and they think I'm being ridiculous when grandma walks in and she's wearing her mask. And our grandbabies say, Grandma, no mask, Grandma, because mommy and daddy aren't wearing masks. So why should you be wearing a mask? So I think for me personally, I just need to sit down and have a conversation with my kids, irregardless of your feelings. I'm not comfortable. And they don't have that respect to recognize that I'm really not comfortable. And then we were talking about the holidays right around the corner, right? Yes. What do you do about Thanksgiving, right? You, like me personally, my kids come, family fly in from California, we're the house that everybody comes to, right? Not this year. And it's not an easy place to be. So I've already said I'm not cooking, I'm not doing Thanksgiving, but yet I'm invited to a Thanksgiving. What do? Do you say to people, okay, I'll come, but everybody needs to wear a mask? Is that okay to put that out there and say, I want to be there. I want to be with my family. This is what I want, but can you respect me and wear a mask? The only time I feel comfortable doing that is if they come to my house. I don't feel comfortable telling somebody else in their own house to wear a mask. How do you deal with that?
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think everything you're saying is correct. That the way I come is if everyone wears a mask, and if people aren't willing to wear a mask, then I'm not willing to come. And recognizing that the consequence is that I don't get to be part of the family experience. The consequence is that I'm not getting to celebrate Thanksgiving the way we have historically, traditionally done so. And I think there is so much grief, even the fact that we have to talk about it. How are we going to trick or treat this year? Are people going to trick or treat? Well, we're going to do this, this, and this. Well, I'm going to do that. Like the fact that we even have to think about how this is going to happen is grief itself. And it is really hard because I do feel then like this outlier if I'm the one that's saying I'm comfortable with the mask when everyone else isn't. So then it feels like I'm doing something wrong. Yeah. Yeah. And you have to do what you are comfortable with. Otherwise, it won't be comfortable. And I think the challenging part is if nothing happens and everyone's okay and we got through and no one got sick, that's amazing. And it was worth the risk. And if we get through and you hear about these, like the Sweet 16 party in New York or New Jersey, where 300 something people got, the wedding in Maine that 87 people got COVID from, right? These events that wasn't a good idea. But it's not until we have hindsight and not till we have how it plays out. So if it's okay, then it was okay. But if it's not okay, right? If it didn't turn out okay, then I wouldn't be okay with it, right? So I think being able to say, I'm okay living in the space I feel comfortable, which is me wearing a mask, and asking you guys to wear a mask around me. And if nothing happens, I'm okay with that because I couldn't live with me not saying anything and something happening.
Not easy to do.
It's not. And my
Not
heart,
easy to
I was
do.
just thinking about that too, right? Like it's,
Not easy to do.
but where you started though, Tammy, was saying they don't respect my comfort level. And so what I'm doing is I'm putting myself out there and I'm saying, I'm not okay with this. I'm risking them saying, then don't come, or I'm risking them saying, well, we don't want to be here. Right. So there's almost a sense of rejection that could come with that. And so then, right, we get into the psychological of, am I important? Am I wanted? Right. It's, and then, but it's a mask and it's my comfort level. And aren't I worth just them putting, a mask on or having some discomfort in that time? And so this really does play into the psychological mental health in making such a request that I'm not even sure they will accept.
And I have something to add too. In a question, I personally put up pretty severe boundaries early on, and I still sort of feel residual guilt from that with my external family, not just the four of us. And I wonder the impact that made on the relationships with those people. And so I don't know if that's just me internally feeling like, hey, I put up these boundaries, I felt good about them, but perhaps they took it personally, or if in fact they are fine and they knew that it was just because of COVID. So do you then circle back with these people that you're feeling guilty about and say, hey, can we clear the air? Are you okay with the boundaries I put up? And now that we don't have any boundaries and we're all just kind of free falling it, unfortunately, in my family, for better or for worse, I just have a lot of guilt because it's like, well, gosh, Ashley, you think so differently now than you did 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And what's up with that? And you put a bunch of boundaries around me a month ago, and now here we are, and you're completely fine that I just got off my flight or whatever.
Mhm.
And it's like, part of it is, okay, the more we know, part of it is, at this point, I'm just kind of sick of it. I think everyone's kind of fatigued
That
and
balance. Yeah.
right. And so then you start to feel like you yourself, because none of us had the answers, you kind of feel like a silly person for putting yourself and them through this exhausting part of the relationship where you've exhausted them, and you feel like you've taken them down a road that maybe was going to hurt the relationship, only now to not have to worry about any of that and just be okay. Well, in my mind, I'm thinking there's some residual impact of that now that we're all hanging out again.
Yeah.
So do you address it, or how do you, what are your advice? What's your advice? I'm so curious.
So what I want to just pause, because I'm aware of this within my body, do a body check right now. I have a huge knot in my stomach right now. Talking about something that this feels really vulnerable. Tammy, you wanting to say, masks make me feel comfortable. I'm at a demographic that might be more than my grandkids, even more than my kids. Then that feels really vulnerable. And Shannon, both sides of what you were saying, right? The fear and the anxiety that I feel, that's going to live in your body, and then not having that acknowledged, there's a vulnerability of not being seen in that space. And Ashley's saying with you of, I did what I did. And as I've become more comfortable with living with the virus, I have started to relax my boundaries. And what I would say is that's evolution. And recognizing that some people who had different belief systems from you at the beginning, then it's different. And if there were hurt feelings, and if that is something that maybe left a mark on the relationship, 100% I would go and just repair. I think, right, we're always going to do stuff. And I think I will say that's my frustration with some of this political stuff of bringing it back to, well, we were told this back in February, we were told this back here. And I'm like, yeah, but fast forward, right? We're 6 months, 7 months into this. And so what we knew here and what we have done or not done, where people might not have been wearing masks here, and then now they might be. I mean, so I think that being able just to say, I just want to check in with you. My fear is, because I did something that violated my belief system, because you guys are so important to me, that I want to make sure that me having a boundary that I felt safe with, that felt like I was doing my job as the mom and protecting my family, it's okay if it hurt their feelings, because then I can say, well, of course, that hurt your feelings. I understand that would hurt your feelings. I'm keeping you away from us, which didn't even feel good to me. And then that way you can let it go and not worry about the question towards, because it sounds like that would make you feel really uncomfortable every time you might be around them, wondering.
Right. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think too, guys, the longer we live with something, the more accustomed and acclimated we get to it. And like I was saying, where that's evolution, that's how we survive. And recognizing that, how do we keep ourselves safe? How do we keep ourselves comfortable? What's the point of pushing my comfort level? What's the point? That I don't want someone else upset with me? And if that's the case, then that's the conversation I want to have. What I really want to tell you is I don't feel comfortable with masks, without masks on, in an enclosed space. And if you're going to be in my home, but what I don't feel comfortable is saying that to you, because I'm afraid that you'll get mad at me for saying it. I'm afraid you won't want to come and be around me if I say the only way you get to be around me is having a mask on. And that makes me sad, or that puts a knot in my stomach. And I think that this, while we said there's a polarization of mask wearing in politics, but I think also kind of that space of feeling included and having belonging. And those are fundamental to our mental health. And not having those outlets that I'm used to, or not having those outlets that I want, that are out of my control, how I handle it, and the behaviors I choose to do of wearing masks or not going certain places or not around a certain amount of people. Those are choices I can make in a situation where I'm not in control. And the hope is, and sadly, there's not a guarantee towards this, but the hope is being able to have that conversation versus the conversation about wearing a mask, or the conversation about the politics, is one that can be had.
Then the other piece to that is having the courage
Yes.
to say that to your family with that caveat that you can be rejected, and say, no, well, Ma, don't come.
Yeah. Which
And
is
that's not easy to do.
It's not. And
Sure.
Tammy, that's why I have the knot in my stomach. Right? That's why I have this knot in my stomach, because to put myself out in this vulnerable position is not easy. And to think like you would choose to not wear a mask overseeing me. I mean, I would not feel important. I would not feel cared for. I would not feel chosen. I mean, absolutely. And so risking that does take courage. Absolutely.
And I
I
would,
want to be in my back pocket now when I talk to my family. I'm just saying.
and I was going to say, I think it's interesting, right? Because in this pandemic, we've all had to go a little bit inward, and our world has gotten small with our loved ones. And so that's why this conversation is so geared towards dealing with family. Because, if you think about it, in public, you can be so open with your own thoughts on the mat. You can wear a mask if you want. You can, employers require you to wear a mask.
You can stay away from people that don't.
Right. You can stay away. You can put up your bubble if you want to. You don't have to interact in a big setting. If you don't want to, you can, potentially, I saw they were doing curbside voting in my community. I mean, there are options for people. You don't have to go in the restaurant if you don't want to.
Right.
But so the public setting, the public sphere has been a little bit easier to navigate. And so again, I think the problems have really come up for folks and myself personally, because you all of a sudden find yourself having to interact.
Yes. And we have family that was supposed to come here from Michigan driving, and they've got young kids. They were supposed to come next week. And so everything's just blowing up right now, right? And they're like, well, would we see you? And they have to figure out whether or not it's safe. And then I'm like, well, I'm not having people in my house right now. So, but my mother-in-law is. So she would house them. And so recognizing right there's a difference of comfort level, and to not want to feel like I'm insulting them by not offering my home, because otherwise, of course, I would have, right? And then at the same time, they're sending emails saying, well, what are your numbers and what is your space? And I'm like, we're fine. You got, like to say, I'm worried about where you're coming from because it's worse there. So then it goes back to then that stigma of what are your numbers and where's your bubble? And we always feel comfortable where we are because we feel, right, we're going to feel more safe than Austin's numbers are off the chart or Texas numbers. I'm aware, but I'm also going to feel unique or separate from that because I'm doing something, I'm wearing my mask, or I'm not hanging out with. That's not us, or that's not my community. We're being so safe. We're doing, curbside pickup. We're doing curbside voting. So I think there's also kind of this spot that people will have of, it's not me, it's them. And if you're if your family, Tammy, for instance, has not seen it, or the cases that they saw were very mild, then again, it's not going to validate your fear. It's not going to validate your concerns. And I just would come back and definitely, I think it's great as a parent. I think it's great as a friend. I think it's great as a family member to say, oh, here's a boundary. If it's something that's important to me, I'm going to reinforce it. And then if it's something, I've done this with my kids, I'm like, you can't do that. And then I'm like, you know what? I really don't have a strong reason why. So yeah, we can do that now. So if something no longer fits, not just, well, I said no, so I have to keep up with a no. Like if that's not something that is a point, then I don't have to fight that fight. So kind of going back, Ashley, where you're saying of here, if this was a fight I was going to fight, now I don't feel that way. So I'm changing my mind. And hopefully we can just come back to that space of respect. I don't have to agree with you. I don't have to like what you're saying. I can be sad and we can grieve together. But how do you respect what I'm saying? And how do you respect me for saying it?
Takes a lot of strength.
Yes. And Shannon, just even what you did, that deep breath and letting it go, because this is not, I mean, we're talking about fear, anxiety, health. We're talking about life, and putting on top of that, we're talking about relationships. And that's everything.
Mhm. And we have just a couple more minutes. If anyone has a final question they want to ask, or drop in the chat if you don't want to say anything, we'll open it up just for a couple more questions, probably one or two we have time for.
While you guys are thinking, what I'm going to encourage you to do is think about how I can make my holidays look different. We usually have my mom over on Christmas, and I'm trying to find a fire pit right now so that we can have her over in our front yard, and if it's cold, we'll be prepared for it. But probably we'll need some type of fans out there because it's usually 85 degrees on Christmas Day. But just recognizing, how can I do something different? If seeing my family is important and I haven't made that swing back that says, yes, we can have people in our house and we can just have our pod, then think about what I do want to do to make this special. And Tammy, for instance, if you're not able to see them, to really make a point of writing letters of thankfulness, and how family and being together and spending that time has really been something that you cherish and are so thankful for. And even if you're able to do that, to recognize, I'm not being able to be as close as I would want to be. And so just trying to figure out what are some small things that we can do that would acknowledge that this isn't normal. This is sad. This is grief. And it doesn't have to not be a good time. It doesn't have to not be a special day just because COVID sucks.
And I have a neighbor who does family Zoom nights. They do game nights over Zoom. And I know some people have Zoom fatigue, so I get it if that's not a thing. But, even doing something special over a Zoom call or stuff like that seems to work for some people.
Yeah.
I know a lot of
absolutely.
my Canadian friends, because we just had Canadian Thanksgiving up north. A lot of them, what they did was grandmother went around and dropped off cookies and all of the decorating stuff and all of the materials you need to, make cookies with grandma. And then they got on the Zoom and all the kids, were making these cookies. So it felt like they were together,
Mhm.
but still, because they couldn't, the numbers had gone up. So I agree. I think we have to look at this holiday season and reevaluate and look for other ways to do things.
Start new traditions.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've done that with my mom too, and the boys just love it. It's something that they can look forward to. She makes the recipe with them, and goes through it. I'm not in it, where normally I'd be the one baking with them, and so here's something that is just I'm so glad you shared that, because it is such a great, it's fun, and to recognize that we still can have fun, even though it might be in these parameters instead of these.
Oh gosh, well, thank you, Dr. Crowley. This has been just overwhelmingly rejuvenating for the holiday season as we approach what could be a scary time. You've helped us turn it on its head today and look at it with that silver lining. So thank you so much. I encourage everyone to go to Anne Crowley's website. I believe it's just anncrowley.com.
And Crowley PhD.
phd.com. And she does have a virtual practice if you'd like to learn more from her. It's just been so wonderful to have you on today. Thank you so much, everyone. And please, I encourage you to visit templebioscience.org to see all the programs we have coming up. And we'll see you on November 6th for the Launch and Learn webinar. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you so much. I really appreciate all your help. This was wonderful, and have a wonderful holiday.
Happy Halloween.
Thank you. Happy Halloween. Thank you for this opportunity, guys. It's great seeing you again.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Crowley. Have a great day.
Thank you.